September 8, 1900, the wind had been building since morning. By early afternoon, the streets of Galveston, Texas, were filling with seawater from below, not from the Gulf, which was still a quarter-mile away, but from the ground itself, as the island's drainage gave way to the rising surge. Most of the city's population was moving toward higher ground, or the center of the island. The telegraph station on the Strand had been issuing storm warnings since the previous evening under the direction of the United States Weather Bureau. At approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, as the storm was still 3 hours from making its worst landfall, the station's senior operator, a man named Clarence Ellery Dunn, transmitted a message that was received by the Western Union Relay Office in Houston. That message was not a weather report. It was not a request for evacuation assistance. It was not addressed to the Weather Bureau. It was addressed to a private correspondent whose name appears in the Houston Relay log only as initials WFH, and whose full identity the Western Union Relay log for September 8, 1900, does not provide. The message itself was 10 words long. The Houston Relay clerk, a man named Arthur Blythe, copied it in full into the relay log as procedure required. Then, before the end of his shift on September 9th, after the storm had passed and Galveston had gone silent, Arthur Blythe removed the relay log page for September 8th, folded it, and placed it inside his coat. He did not destroy it. He carried it for 31 years. He took it home from the relay office on the night of September 9th, placed it in the locked drawer of his desk, and left it there through 6 home addresses, 2 city moves, the First World War, and the Depression. Arthur Blythe died in Houston in 1931 of pneumonia, at the age of 63. His wife found the folded relay log page in the locked drawer of his desk beside a handwritten note in Blythe's hand that said only, "This should have been destroyed, and I could not destroy it." The page and the note were donated to the Houston Metropolitan Research Center by Blythe's daughter in 1958. They are there now in the collection designated Western Union Historical Materials, Houston, 1895-1935, reference HM 1958, WU 04. The relay log page exists. Clarence Dunn's last message from Galveston exists, and for 64 years, from 1900 to 1964, it sat in a public archive without being connected by any researcher to the name of the man it was addressed to, or to what that man's connection to Galveston was before the storm erased it. The official history of the Galveston hurricane of 1900 is one of American history's most documented natural disasters, the deadliest in the nation's history, killing between 6,000 and 12,000 people, destroying over 3,000 buildings, and eliminating in a single night the wealthiest city per capita in Texas. What the official history records about the city's telegraph communications in the hours before the storm is thorough and well-sourced. The Weather Bureau's storm warnings, the attempted evacuations coordinated by wire, the moment the last relay connection to the mainland went down as the lines fell to wind and water. What the official history has never engaged with is a separate category of telegraph traffic that was moving through the Galveston station in the 6 weeks preceding the storm. Traffic that Clarence Dunn documented in a private operational log he kept separate from the official station record, and that deals with a subject that has nothing to do with weather, commerce, or any of the public functions the Galveston station officially served. Clarence Ellery Dunn was not a peripheral figure in the Galveston communications network. He had served as senior operator at the Galveston station since 1891, 9 years before the storm. He had overseen the installation of the island's expanded telegraph infrastructure in 1896, which connected the Galveston station directly to a new relay node in Houston, and upgraded the island's line capacity from 4 simultaneous circuits to 11. He was 44 years old in September of 1900, a career telegrapher with credentials recognized by both Western Union and the federal government's Signal Corps wire service. And he was one of only 3 operators in Texas licensed to transmit on the Signal Corps Priority Channel that connected to the War Department in Washington. That channel was not used for civilian commercial traffic. That channel was reserved for military and federal emergency communications. In the 6 weeks before the storm, Clarence Dunn used that channel on 14 separate occasions. The Signal Corps Priority Channel transmission logs for the Galveston station, August through September 1900, are in the National Archives Record Group 1111, the records of the Office of the Chief Signal Officer. 14 transmissions. The log records the date, time, circuit designation, and receiving station for each. It does not record the content of any transmission on the priority channel. Content of Signal Corps priority transmissions in this period was not logged at the originating station. It was logged only at the receiving end. The receiving end for all 14 of Dunn's priority transmissions in those 6 weeks was not Washington. It was the Signal Corps relay station at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. The Fort Sam Houston relay logs for August and September 1900 are listed in the National Archives as part of Record Group 111. They are listed as transferred to restricted access in 1943 and have not been returned to the general collection. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as compelling as I do, hit subscribe so the next one reaches you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress research of this kind unless you tell it otherwise. Now, back to Clarence Dunn, and to what he was sending on a military communications channel from a civilian telegraph station in the weeks before Galveston was destroyed. To understand what Clarence Dunn was transmitting, we have to go back to what Galveston actually was in 1900. Not the weather station and commercial port that the disaster narrative focuses on, but the specific institutional role the island and its communications infrastructure played in the federal operations of that period that have been consistently underreported. Galveston in 1900 was the busiest port in Texas and one of the 12 busiest in the United States. That much is in every account of the storm. What is not in those accounts is that Galveston was also, in the 2 years preceding the storm, the primary Gulf Coast landing point for a category of federal maritime traffic that was classified under the military provisioning records of the War Department following the Spanish-American War of 1898. The war had ended in December of 1898. The War Department's post-war logistics operations in the Gulf of Mexico, the movement of equipment, materials, and, in the War Department's own inventory terminology, special cargo of undescribed classification, continued through 1900. Galveston's deep water port facilities were used for this traffic. That is not a speculation. The post-war period saw an unprecedented expansion of federal military logistics operations along the Gulf Coast, documented in the War Department's annual reports to Congress for 1899 and 1900. Those reports describe in aggregate terms the volume of material being moved through Gulf ports in the post-war period without itemizing what specific ports received what specific cargo. The itemization exists in the port-level manifests. The port manifests for Galveston in 1899 and 1900, held in National Archives Record Group 36, the records of the Bureau of Customs, contain 14 entries across 18 months that list cargo as War Department materials. Classification withheld. No weight, no itemization. No origin port outside of a code designation. 14 entries of undescribed War Department cargo moving through the island's port in the 18 months before it was destroyed. The same number as Dunn's priority channel transmissions. The same destination region. Whether those two sets of 14 are connected by coincidence or by coordination is not established by any document that has been examined, but the coincidence of the number, the period, and the institution involved is precise enough to require at minimum an explanation that no historian of the Galveston disaster has ever attempted to provide. The private operational log that Clarence Dunn kept is not in any public archive. It is not in the Galveston and Texas History Center at Rosenberg Library, which holds the most comprehensive collection of pre-storm Galveston documentation. It is not in the Houston Metropolitan Research Center alongside Blythe's relay log page. It is not in the National Archives. What is known about its existence comes from two sources. The first is a letter Dunn wrote to his sister Margaret in Shreveport, Louisiana on August 14, 1900, 3.5 weeks before the storm. That letter is in the Louisiana State Archives, in the collection of the Shreveport family papers donated by Margaret Dunn Harwell's descendants in 1972. In the letter, Dunn tells his sister that he has been keeping a separate log of certain traffic that has been moving through the station and that he intends to send it to her for safekeeping after the summer. He does not describe the traffic. He does not describe the log. The letter is the only evidence that the log existed. The log was never sent to Margaret. The storm came first. The second source is the 10-word message that Arthur Blythe copied into the Houston relay log on the afternoon of September 8th. That message, which is now in the Houston Metropolitan Research Center, in the handwriting of a relay clerk who kept it for 31 years because he could not bring himself to destroy it, reads, "The log goes with me, and with it what they came for." 10 words. A man staying at his post in a station everyone else had left, transmitting one final message to initials he had clearly corresponded with before, telling someone that whatever record he had been keeping was going to disappear with him into the storm. He did not send the log ahead. He did not evacuate. Clarence Ellery Dunn's body was recovered from the wreckage of the Strand Station area 11 days after the storm. The official casualty record of the Galveston disaster lists him by name, occupation, and recovery location. It does not record any personal effects recovered with him. But here is what makes this account different from every lost in the storm story that comes out of the Galveston disaster. In 1904, 4 years after the storm, a researcher named Dr. Edwin Lorraine Mosley, a naturalist and educator based in Sandusky, Ohio, who had been corresponding with several Galveston Weather Bureau personnel about pre-storm atmospheric conditions, received a response from a former Weather Bureau assistant in Galveston named James Klein, brother of the better-known Isaac Klein, the head meteorologist whose own storm account became the official narrative of the disaster. James Klein's response to Dr. Mosley, which is in the Sandusky Library's archival collection under the designation Mosley Scientific Correspondence, 1898-1911, reference SC 1911 MOZ 03, contains one paragraph that has nothing to do with atmospheric conditions. In that paragraph, James Klein tells Mosley that in the days immediately following the storm, while assisting with recovery operations at the Strand, he and another Weather Bureau employee had found, in the wreckage of the telegraph station, a metal dispatch box of the type used for secure document transport. The box was locked. It was intact despite the destruction around it. James Klein brought it to the attention of a federal recovery official on site, a man in civilian dress whose name Klein says he was not given. The official took the box, confirmed it had a War Department lock mechanism. and left the recovery site within the hour. James Klein never saw the box again and was not contacted about it by any federal agency in the weeks that followed. His letter to Dr. Moseley is the only place this account appears. It was written in 1904. It has been in the Sandusky Library for over a century. It has not been cited in any published history of the Galveston storm. It is worth noting that James Klein was himself a trained and credentialed observer. He had served as a Weather Bureau assistant in Galveston since 1897. He was not a sensationalist, and his surviving correspondence with Dr. Moseley covers 6 letters over 7 years, all of which deal with precise meteorological observations. He wrote about the dispatch box in the same measured tone he used to describe barometric readings. He offered no interpretation of why the box was there or what it contained. He noted the War Department lock mechanism because it was a specific and identifying detail, and because he was the kind of man who noted specific and identifying details. That is all. 1 paragraph in 6 letters from a man who otherwise never deviated from his professional subject matter. This is not the only instance of federal recovery personnel removing materials from a disaster site before civilian investigators could document them. In the aftermath of the Johnstown flood of 1889, a federal postal inspector was documented in the Pittsburgh Commercial Gazette on June 3rd of that year as having arrived at the destroyed Johnstown post office site within 36 hours of the flood, before any official Postal Service recovery team had been dispatched, and removing a sealed trunk from the debris. The inspector's name was given in the article as T.R. Caldwell, no T.R. Caldwell appears in the Federal Postal Inspector rolls for 1889, held in National Archives Record Group 28. After the Galveston storm, after the Johnstown flood, the pattern of unnamed or unverifiable federal personnel arriving early at disaster sites and leaving with sealed containers before civilian documentation could be completed is not a theory. It is a pattern in the press record and the survivor testimony of 2 of the 19th century's worst American disasters. Western Union has never adequately addressed why the Houston Relay log page for September 8, 1900 was removed from its binding by the relay clerk on duty and retained by him personally for 31 years. It is never explained why Clarence Dunn's 14 Signal Corps priority channel transmissions in the 6 weeks before the storm were directed to Fort Sam Houston rather than to the Washington War Department, or why the receiving logs for those transmissions remain in restricted access more than 80 years after they were transferred. The War Department and its successor, the Department of Defense, has never explained what the 14 classified cargo manifest entries through Galveston's port in 1899 and 1900 contained, or what became of those materials after the storm erased the port infrastructure. Why would a licensed Signal Corps operator at a civilian telegraph station use a military priority channel for 14 transmissions in 6 weeks, directing all of them to a military relay rather than to the federal civilian weather or commercial authorities he was credentialed to serve? Why would a relay clerk copy a message, keep it for 31 years, and leave a note beside it saying he could not destroy it? Why would a federal recovery official on the storm site leave within an hour of finding a locked War Department dispatch box, without taking a statement from the man who found it, and without contacting that man again? The honest answer is that we do not know what was in that dispatch box, what Clarence Dunn's private log contained, or what the 14 classified cargo entries through Galveston's port were carrying. What we have is a relay log page in Houston that a clerk kept at personal risk, a letter in Sandusky that no storm historian has cited, a set of Signal Corps logs that were restricted in 1943 and not returned, and a 10-word message from a man who chose to stay at his station while the storm came, who knew he was not going to survive it, and who used his last transmission not to call for help but to tell someone that the record was going with him. That is not the behavior of a man sending weather data. That is the behavior of a man who understood what he had been keeping and had decided that keeping it, even to the point of not surviving it, was the right thing to do. We do not know his reasons. We know that he made the choice. And we know that the message he sent is still in a building in Houston, in the handwriting of a man who made the same choice in the opposite direction, who kept it alive because he could not let it die. The official history of the Galveston hurricane tells us that the storm erased almost everything. What the documentary record tells us is that 3 specific items survived it: a relay log page, a letter to a sister in Louisiana that became a letter to a researcher in Ohio, and a locked metal box that was carried away by a man in civilian dress before anyone thought to ask him who he was. These records survive because individuals, not institutions, chose to preserve them. Subscribe and share this with someone who understands that the most important decisions in history are sometimes made by a relay clerk on a September afternoon, holding a folded piece of paper he does not have the heart to burn. Next week, I am tracing the initials WFH from Clarence Dunn's final transmission. There is one figure in the War Department's Gulf Coast logistics correspondence from 1899 and 1900 whose initials match, whose operational role connects to both the classified cargo manifests and the Signal Corps relay station at Fort Sam, Houston, and whose name appears in a congressional appropriations record from 1901, after the storm, in connection with a budget line for the recovery of undescribed federal materials from a coastal disaster site. I have that record. The name is not one you will expect.